Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled Combating the IT Monsters That Keep You Up at Night. My name is Kevin Collins from Unitrends, and I'm here with Joe Noonan, Vice President of Product Marketing, and he'll be taking us through the presentation today. Don't forget, one lucky attendee will be walking away with a $100 Amazon gift card. We'll contact the winner via email after the webinar. But before we get started, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. The session will be recorded, and after the event, you'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar. I would also encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by typing them into the Q&A box in the bottom right of the player. We'll answer your questions at the end of the session. At this point, I'll turn it over to Joe. Enjoy the presentation, and Joe, take it away.
Great, thanks, Kevin, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Always appreciate spending time with you. If this is your second or third or fourth time back, but if it's your first time, hopefully it'll be very helpful in the way that at least you'll learn some interesting things for your organization's backup and continuity needs. Today's topic is a little bit of a broader topic. We're not diving in specifically on one specific area this time. We talk about the IT monsters that keep you up at night. Really, in the end, we know that there's a lot of things that plague IT pros, and we're going to talk about a few of them here in one spot rather than kind of picking on individual topics like we often do. And in the end, we'll talk a little bit about how Unitrends solve some problems in these areas. And very, very hot off the presses, 2 hours ago, we actually launched the announcement of our version 10, and we'll give a little insight as to what's new there and let you know how to get more information. But really, the idea here is to spend a little time helping people think about some of the analysis that might be needed when you're dealing with some of the issues that are out there. So what do those monsters look like these days, right? We know that they're going to take all forms, all shapes, and they pretty much are going to be around and lurking every single day. So we run a survey every year, and this year's is actually coming out right now. We're compiling the data. And we'll do, a nice set of collateral and content to help people understand the new findings we have. But last year in 2016, we ran our annual cloud survey. And basically, when we look at some of the monsters that are out there lurking everywhere for IT, they're all over the place, obviously. But when you look at a couple key ones here that I highlighted in red and even in yellow, being able to recover not just from smaller outages, but handling full site disasters, as well as just the burden of growth in the environment, and the struggles around just understanding that recoverability is going to work are starting just to become very, very key. And I think that's actually a really nice thing to see, the yellow part here, that folks are worried about recoverability. Because in the past, it really wasn't about that, right? Most people were thinking, how do I get all this data backed up? Which, of course, is the excessive data growth. That's still a major problem. But in the end, seeing disaster recovery, validation of backup success, recoverability of data, making sure things are working properly, it's good that that's in the forefront. It's just not good that you have to spend a lot of time thinking about this instead of what's going to serve your end users, right? You need to have your infrastructure and your applications available to them, and there's a lot you can do and want to be doing, making those applications faster, better, deploying new ones, keeping them up to date. There's just a lot of things that the business can use, and everything that's here that's highlighted is kind of something that's a little bit of a distraction, right? And this is where we call those monsters in the sense that, they're here, they're cumbersome, they're going to bother you, and you obviously don't want to have to mess around with them. So diving in a little bit on some of these, the excessive data growth, right? Some of the data behind that, and this came from IDC and their digital universe study a while ago. Over the next 10 years, you're just seeing massive, massive growth in the infrastructure itself, data itself, and then files. In comparison to the growth of IT pros like yourselves, it's massive, right? You're talking about a 33x difference in growth rate between what's happening in the environment to what's happening, within the individuals managing. It screams for simplicity. Obviously, it exudes a major demand and challenge, and that's been reflected in the survey. And what's interesting is that the monsters live in the cloud too, right? A lot of folks are shifting towards SaaS-based applications for certain aspects of their environments, or they might be using more infrastructure as a service, where you're running VMs in Azure, you're running VMs in AWS, and you have a hybrid environment. The cloud is not that safe either, right? There's a lot of technologies in the cloud around redundancy, around reliability, and very cool stuff that allows the cloud to be elastic, to be scalable. but at the same time, you still can have the same types of issues, right? Somebody going in and deleting things, ransomware, other security threats, malicious deletion. There's a lot of things out there that are actually going to, scare folks around data loss when it comes to cloud data. You still need to make sure that that's protected. And this example here is actually around Office 365 specifically. And when you look at Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, people are still obviously losing data using those applications, and the adoption of them is getting to be huge at this point, and it's still growing very fast. So they live out there too. It's just not moving to the cloud doesn't mean you're completely eliminating the monsters. You're just kind of changing the monsters a little bit. And we talk about our friends even being IT monsters sometimes. So I look at VMware as, the best enterprise level hypervisor obviously out there. Microsoft's doing a great job as well to compete, and others coming up with their hypervisors to try to reduce costs for infrastructure such as Nutanix and hyperconverged infrastructure. They have their own hypervisor, KVM, things like that. But VMware is the main ones out there. They've got great APIs that I don't know that a lot of users really understand or appreciate. Some of them do, but backup vendors certainly do. And backup vendors use these to make your lives easier because we can back up way faster as a result of them. Problem is, sometimes there can be monsters lurking here because there have been issues on several occasions in those APIs that cause all backups to be corrupt and nobody knows about it. All right, so every once in a while, our friends can be monsters too, and that obviously goes to the idea and the challenge around verifying recoverability that folks were telling us in our survey. Basically being able to understand that things are definitely going to work, and you know for sure. It's great to see people caring about that and kind of bubbling up to one of the top priorities because, man, is it important, right? Because it impacts everything about disaster recovery and continuity in that sense if it's not working right. And then, of course, new threats, right? We have a $1 billion industry in ransomware. They're releasing 4,000 ransomware attacks daily. And it's expected to continue. It's continuing to evolve. We even have ransomware as a service now. You can go online and YouTube ransomware, and I found a video called Philadelphia Ransomware where apparently you can just sign up, use their platform, and bam, you're a ransomware hacker at that point, and you can start trying to extort money. And it's pretty crazy how this industry has really kind of raised IT and backup and continuity to a very high level, C-level conversation, because this security threat is something that really can get past just about any security product out there, and backup products are becoming very, very important as a mainstay to be able to protect and fix ransomware issues when they occur. So it's pretty amazing. And when you look at 50% of businesses that were attacked actually paid more than 10K, 20% more than 40K. These don't always seem like huge amounts of money, but some people have actually been attacked multiple times, and these numbers can get pretty high. And the bigger pain here is really that downtime. Losing data for a period of time, being down, that's way more costly, right? $700 billion lost in 2016 alone, in North America alone, from downtime last year. So this is the biggest monster of them all, right? Anything that's going to bring you down. It's not just about ransomware. These are the things that can put us all out of business, or at least out of a job if we're taking on downtime and we're not really planning to be able to get around it, right? And this is where, unfortunately, you have to spend time thinking about things that aren't just good for your production environment. You got to be able to think about things that are going to attack your environment, and you have to find ways to understand how you're going to get around those. And that's where we get into the next segment here. Right, how can you be safe from, the monsters that are out there? Now, 5 ways to combat the IT monsters and really be a hero in this sense, because while you don't get congratulated when you have a day where something doesn't go down, making sure you have a plan in place and being able to recover when something does happen and do it quickly, that does get noticed, and we want you to be able to get to that level. So a couple of things. Out of these 5 ways, the first one, aligning recovery with the business. And this involves really just a shift in mentality, some of the questions you ask yourselves, and the way that you kind of develop your strategies. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Focusing the strategy. right? It's very difficult to say I'm just going to take everything and do a ton of stuff with everything in my environment. You might need to focus. You might need to do certain activities and take on certain strategies with certain workloads and other strategies with other workloads. One size doesn't always fit all. Kill complexity, right? There is nothing that makes everything about backup, continuity, IT resilience, disaster recovery, nothing makes this more difficult than lots and lots of complexity in the production infrastructure and in the backup infrastructure. So being able to kill that and identify points of complexity and solutions around that, I think, are big. IT resilience is kind of a new theme, and leveraging analytics and automation within the solutions that are out there provide a lot of ways to be proactive around being able to, prevent issues, being, ultimately making your infrastructure resilient. That proactive nature, I think, is really important, not just in the planning process, but you can get that from your solutions as well. And then support, right? You're not alone. Support and the structure of support in terms of how your solution is architected, it's all important to really understand that. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I think these are kind of the top 5 ways to combat these monsters and make life a little bit easier on yourselves. So first, aligning recovery to the business. When you think about a lot of the questions that I hear when we ask people what they're worried about, very often you can see like a data focus in that particular response. Is my machine backed up? Was it replicated? Is the retention set? I think a great one, and like we saw in the survey, will it recover, is starting to become one of the top ones. But these are all pretty data-focused questions, right? When we think about aligning to the business, what does that really mean? I think it takes it's kind of like asking those questions a little bit differently so that you're thinking about how it really does impact your organization, right? How much data will I lose? Not just is it backed up, but am I backing it up frequently enough? Is my backup set up to back it up frequently enough and at the right times to where it's going to keep my applications running and I'm going to lose the smallest amount of data that I'm allowed to lose, and understanding what that data loss allowance is, right, that RPO, the recovery point objective. How long will I be down? Your RTO, your recovery time objective. This is going to impact, and it could be at the application level, and it usually is, by the way. Some apps are okay to be down longer than others. But really thinking about this from this question's perspective rather than just can I recover is, I think, a great way to really align your infrastructure with the business. Is all my data going to the right places, right? Data rarely stays in one spot. Over the life cycle of data, it's going to go into different locations for compliance purposes, which is a great business alignment strategy, and also for disaster recovery purposes, again, continuity for your business. Can I go back in time just enough? And just enough is really important, right? You might have specific requirements that say, I can only keep 7 years, and I do not want to keep a minute later because then I become accountable for that data. But can you actually meet that compliance requirement? Sometimes that's an external compliance requirement that's mandated from other external entities into your business, like HIPAA, SOX, things like that. Sometimes it's just internal within your organization, but understanding that at the business level is always important. ROI and controlling infrastructure costs, keeping applications performing and controlling access. I think these are great business level questions when you start evaluating solutions in terms of how you're going to manage data in the environment. Right? ROI is phenomenal. Backup in most cases is considered a cost. It's pretty painful and it's complex and it's a nuisance because it's just kind of there as an insurance policy in case something goes wrong. And to be honest, things go wrong frequently now. So it's good that it's there and people understand the ROI and that it's got to be there, but you don't always find yourself able to budget what you really want from a solution, because it can be tough to say, well, the ROI around, for instance, cloud disaster recovery, which would give me complete failover into another environment. I only have one site now. Today, I'm going to be down 48 hours if I have a major outage. Using the cloud, I might only be down 30 minutes, but the ROI costs more to do that. The ROI, I can't really justify that. So thinking about ways to make backup more productive for the business and using all that data that's stored in backups that are typically deduplicated but can be made available pretty quickly, finding more, I think innovative ways of allowing the business to be productive from that, I think is a big part of how folks should be looking to evaluate. And controlling infrastructure costs is always important, right? Being efficient with storage, being efficient with copies of data, being efficient with how data gets spun up and made accessible. All that's good, and making sure that it's being protected, replicated, and managed in a way that's not impacting your production applications. That's always critical, and the right people have to access it. The wrong people can't. You know, obviously, if you have a large organization where you might have 400 or 500 people in the IT department itself, that becomes very, very imperative. But if there's a smaller shop only has a few people, you know, a lot of times it doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal. But as you do more productive things with your backups, you still find that you just need to make sure that data is not accessible to the wrong people. I think these are the questions that really kind of help focus IT, and especially around backup and continuity with a business focus. Now, a challenge, I think, in a lot of these cases is that most solutions out there are not business focused at all, right? They focus on individual backup tasks. Just look at the user interfaces, right? I'll set up a backup job. I'll set up a backup copy job. I'll set up retention in some other spot. I'll set up my schedules based on a time and a frequency and all this kind of stuff. None of that actually aligns with anything that's related to the business. You have to figure that out. Another component to it is that most solutions out there aren't really doing the analytics and automation to allow you to see whether you're compliant with those recovery objectives, right? So if you have no confidence in your ability to achieve any sort of recovery objective, why on earth would you go and communicate that to anybody else if you're not being pushed to do it, right? So I think there's this little back and forth where a lot of people know that they want to get to this level and really think about the business and think in terms of SLAs and recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. But because it's so difficult to prove, why on earth would I show that, you know, it really is as challenging as it is? You know, we'll just fight the fire when the fire comes. And we all know that that's, in the end, when the fire does come, that ends up being a pretty bad scenario for folks. So having that visibility is something that's lacking in most solutions. And a lot of times, we talked about this, the backup and continuity ends up being more of an insurance policy. It's a cost rather than a value driver. There are not many solutions that are helping you increase productivity, reduce infrastructure costs, and actually be proactive in the analytics that are involved in backup. Because a lot of data is going into a backup system that can be used for proactive reasons. And that's something where I think when you see the evolution from backup to continuity to data management, you start to see more functionality that'll help folks in that realm be more proactive using the backup system as a catalyst. And I think that's where there are solutions out here that do these things. There's just not that many. That's why I say most solutions are not very business focused. So that's something in the evaluation process to really start looking for. If you start asking those questions around the business, you start finding big gaps, and you find that it's important that you consider solutions that can solve those gaps, you're going to be way better in terms of aligning, you know, basically your project plans over the next year or two with what's going to happen in the business, and be able to justify and the ROI of those by aligning them there. So that was a long one. It was hopefully helpful. Very important, obviously, because it's kind of the initial planning part. Now, when we think about the strategy and focusing, because of budgetary reasons, you can't just kind of have the greatest strategy for everything. And environments are getting way more complex, right? People still have heterogeneity on premises, right? You're using sometimes multiple hypervisors because maybe VMware is a little too costly, so you're looking at Hyper-V, you might be looking at Zen Server, you might be looking at KVM, or even like in Nutanix Acropolis if you're going the hyper-converged route. And there's still usually a good amount of physical infrastructure still out there, and lots of data showing there are many, many physical servers obviously still running in the infrastructure itself. So now I have those operating systems to worry about. Detailed applications, we know Microsoft applications here, plus Oracle, lots of others, SAP, things like that you have to worry about. But now things are shifting, right? We talked about Office 365 earlier, SaaS-based applications, Google, Salesforce, whatever that might be. You now have data running there. Again, lots of cool technology out there. It's not protected the same way you would think, so it still needs backup. Same thing with infrastructure as a service as you start to have, you know, hybrid environments using compute infrastructures from Amazon and Azure. And then, of course, you know, you have a lot of people still have data kind of sitting out on NAS boxes, and sometimes a lot of it. And that needs to be protected in special ways too, right? So aligning continuity with the criticality of the different workloads that are out there understanding what matters to most is always going to be good. Prioritization is critical, right? Because in the end, you're going to pick strategies, especially around a DR strategy, that's going to meet your budget and your business requirements based on those priorities. I could go a cold route for certain machines. Cold's not great, right? From a DR perspective, cold really means I'm going to wait until an outage happens, and then I'm going to do a full recovery of everything, including the infrastructure, to some other location, or I'm going to wait for my current location to be back up and running. That typically means that those workloads are not that important. You don't need those up and running, you know, even within a couple of days in most cases, but it's low cost, right? And that might be what you can afford for certain applications. And then there's hot, which is great, right? Everybody would love to have hot DR with no downtime, but it costs a ton, right? You're talking about duplicate infrastructure, constant replication, basically leveraging continuous replication and fault tolerance between sites. Very, very high cost in networking and infrastructure and storage. So it's great to have. You might be able to afford it for certain applications. Most people can. And then there's warm, right? That's a nice area where it's in the middle. A lot of folks are able to get a lot more done when they kind of look at this warm approach, where you're using instant recovery techniques that'll spin up backups directly from backup storage and immediately make them available very quickly, so the downtime is limited, but it doesn't cost a lot on the infrastructure side. So that cost is obviously mitigated. So that's a great middle ground for a lot of applications. And for a lot of times, this might be what you do for your tier 1 apps if you don't have the budget to go the hot route, which a lot of people don't. So you know, kind of review, asking those business questions, aligning the business with IT, and now focusing your strategy accordingly to the priorities of the applications and workloads, not taking it all on at once and thinking it's a one-size-fits-all. Now, I think the next one is huge, right? Kill complexity. The more complex your environment is, the more difficult everything becomes, right? The management of it becomes very painful. You'll typically see complexity lead to environments that have a lot more vendors, and you're never going to have one vendor for your whole environment, right? It's really about, and I'm talking about everything in the infrastructure. You might be able to get to one vendor for a particular solution, like backup and recovery. Some people still have multiple vendors for that. I think the idea is reducing that complexity as much as possible helps a lot. It helps you become more secure as well, right? Security can suffer in a complex environment because it's tough to keep all aspects of a complex environment up to date and ready to look out for the security threats that are out there today, like ransomware, which is killing folks right now. And then, of course, flexibility is key as well, right? Your environment needs are going to change. We just talked about the fact that you might be focusing your strategy on one thing today, and it may move to something else in a year or two. Being able to be flexible and move and future-proof IT in a way, I think is pretty key there to removing complexity. So looking at backup architecture complexity specifically, right? When we talk about vendor complexity, really there's one way that I like to look at it, and it's really the stack. If I look at the fact that in a backup solution, just on premises at the bottom half, I might have a vendor for my storage. I might have a vendor for my servers. I may have that running on a hypervisor. There's another vendor. Then I have my operating system, usually Windows, in the standard world of backup. And then I have my backup software. I might have 4 or 5 vendors involved in that solution. And that can be pretty complex, right? And I'm not saying that's bad, but that is going to take, when we talk about more management, you have to integrate that. You have to make sure that's all maintained and up to date. You have to support all that. That's more time. That is more management. And it gets even more complex as you extend things to secondary sites and to cloud. There's more vendors involved there and more different, and additional solutions to handle replication, to handle spin up, to handle DR testing, all that kind of stuff. Now, even within on-premises backup software, there's management complexity. Right, there are solutions out there, and to be honest, this is not odd. This is how a lot of backup solutions are, especially Windows-based ones. They'll typically have many, many different components. They decentralize and distribute everything. And distributed is good when you have a distributed infrastructure with lots of remote sites, and you need to put instances of a solution in each site. That'll make sense. But distributing by role can get very complex, right? One kind of leading backup vendor in the space is Windows-based will have a media server plus proxies doing the work, plus repositories handling the data, plus WAN accelerators handling replication and making that efficient, plus dedicated management servers, plus dedicated monitoring, plus dedicated reporting. The sprawl here around not only servers but user interfaces creates a level of complexity. I mean, think about how difficult this is to keep secure in an environment, especially when it's all Windows-based and you have ransomware out there attacking left and right. This is where, I think when you look at the backup architecture, not only is there vendor complexity in the stack, there's management complexity within the backup software itself. And these are things you have to just look out for, right? There are simpler solutions out there today. And by the way, this isn't about a solution pitch really, as it is just helping you identify and see that this complexity exists as you do make decisions around this, or you start to evaluate what you have today, because you might have inherited an infrastructure recently and you're trying to figure these things out and what's best for the business. So it's just good to get an understanding of these things. One of the newer world approaches is more of a hardened Linux backup appliance versus that Windows backup software, because the backup appliance can really integrate the solution stack into one vendor and one simple solution. And typically, these will unify all those management roles in one place as well. Now, IT resilience, and we talk about analytics and automation. Lots of big words, lots of cool techie things. Resilience really talking about being proactive in nature around the threats that are out there. Right, so when we think about ransomware, good example. And we know that backup vendors will protect and recover from ransomware. We already talked about security in general, so I'm not going to rehash that. But when we think about analytics and automation, what about making sure that you can recover properly from ransomware, that you can detect ransomware? All of these things are important to understand that it might be in the environment, to eradicate that as quickly as possible so that you limit your downtime, limit your data loss. And again, if you're thinking about the business, right, how long can I be down? How much data can I lose? These types of things start to align pretty well into that strategy when you say, listen, I'm going to allow 1 hour of downtime for certain applications. It's very critical that I have analytics in place to understand threats for those applications, because I can't afford to lose more than 30 minutes of data or be down more than an hour. So looking at the test section, recovery, analytics, and automation. So a lot of times in the past, especially around disaster recovery, but this goes for local environments, this also goes for cloud environments. It goes back to all the way to the research we showed in the beginning, right? People worried about recoverability, making sure that they can validate backup success. A lot of times that was kind of a pray scenario, right? I just hope it all works. A lot of people were hit by those VMware CBT issues back in the day. Ransomware is hitting a lot of folks today as well. It's impacting backup vendors, especially the Windows-based ones. So making sure that backups work, making sure your DR strategy works. It's not just about data. It's about making sure that applications are literally going to be available for your business and being able to prove that through analytics and automation. So a couple of ways this gets done, right? And we're going to step up to what I think is kind of the best way here, and I'll explain why. So today you have data integrity checks in a lot of solutions out there, and that's great. It is great. It should be done all the time, right? You want to make sure that what you read and what you wrote are the same as a part of that protection process and a part of that copy process if you happen to be replicating data to different locations. Now, the problem is, going back to the VMware issues before, and even ransomware as well, when folks read blocks of data and they send that data somewhere else and they read it back, it all looks good. It looks like the same data. That doesn't mean it's recoverable. It doesn't mean it's good, right? And that can happen because of backup APIs. That can happen because of security threats. It could happen because you're just not going to know there's really an issue until that machine comes up, because it can run as is, but it may not be able to reboot, which is kind of interesting. Now, as you get into applications, some vendors will mount a database and just do a basic integrity check and just make sure it can mount. Now, that's not bad, right? It's application level. You're getting down to a database. You're saying, I know this granular thing works. Again, that doesn't mean that I can actually bring up that system. And it doesn't mean that what's relied upon from that database is going to work as well. Because remember, business businesses don't run off of databases, they run off of all the things that connect them to that database and deliver a service. All right, screenshot verification goes another level, right? I can now see a machine boot, and I can say, oh, it actually proved that that one machine booted. That's great. But you kind of need to do all the things before as well, because booting doesn't necessarily mean that, for instance, the database was good under that. And this is where we kind of get to where I think is a very strong way of looking at this. When we think of IT resilience, it's application level orchestration, verification, making sure that things are going to work proactively. The business isn't actually running until the users are productive again. And making sure that a database or even the machine running the database is working is not enough in most cases, right? I could have, and I'll even flip it a little bit because I used the database scenario before. Let's say that I have an application. Obviously, folks need the web front end working, the application servers working, the database, the authentication, all that has to work. And I validated and made sure through screenshot verification that all those individual machines came up. But underneath the hood, a lot of my application services aren't starting well. Well, guess what? I mean, it looks like you're recoverable, but your users don't think you're recoverable. And this goes back to aligning to the business, right? Is the full business service that you're delivering recoverable? And this is where automation technology can really help kind of get in and understand these end-tier applications. They can automate in isolation the ability to boot these end-tier applications through the right sequence. And obviously, you want to look for solutions that can do this as fast as possible, right? Most end-tier applications are not going to need a 1 through N type of boot order. You might have one like you see here in the screenshot where there's 6 machines, they all rely upon each other. The first 2 just need to be up and running first, and then the other 4 can come up, right? So you want to be able to parallelize, bad word there. You want to concurrently be able to boot these machines within those boot orders to reduce recovery times. Being able to verify applications at the application service level, at the website level, at the database level, at the authentication level, understanding all those things are there. This is a screenshot of a solution we have that actually has tick lists of all these applications, and this is not a complete list. But you can also run your own custom scripts. Right? Think about ransomware. Some of the ransomware threats that are out there today lay inactive within a system, and then they spawn to become active later to encrypt the files. So if I recover back to an older point in time that has that inactive ransomware executable, then I'm just going to go through this vicious cycle of getting ransomware over and over again until I remove that. So being able to detect those types of things as a part of your automation and recovery assurance is critical when you have threats like that that are that advanced. And naturally, environments are not always the same, right? You might be spinning things up in a different location. It could be in the cloud. It could be on a secondary site. The network topology could be different, so understanding being able how to isolate from production, virtual network assignment, network remodeling, re-IPing the guests. So this involves orchestration at the hypervisor layer, at the guest level, and at the network level. And that includes cloud APIs as well. And in the end, we talked about gaps in solutions. One of the gap fillers is having compliance reporting. Now, it's really painful to try to run through manual reports around all this stuff. So having business level reports that will say, hey, I'm red, these were unrecoverable, or yellow, these did not meet my business SLAs around RTOs and RPOs, or green, everything's working. And you can see that for every application, and you can see that listed in the reporting. That's all very critical to providing that visibility, right? We want to take the blindness that we talked about before with IT and how that can be not only blind for IT in the business, but even just for folks that are just trying to get an understanding of what recoverability looks like for themselves, right? You may not be ready to communicate this up to the C-level or even to direct management to understand all aspects of recoverability and sign up to an SLA. If you're not there yet, that's fine. But understanding what you can achieve is an important first step. That benchmarking kind of needs to be done, and that's something you can get with this level of automation and reporting. And then the last component, right, a lot of data is being taken into the backup systems, and you can do a lot of interesting stuff with it. And one of the use cases that some vendors are starting to put out for end users to take advantage of is security threat detection. specifically around ransomware, right? You can actually start seeing patterns, change rate, growth rates, and a lot of other metrics that occur within an environment, and you can test those and look for threat conditions that would mimic something that's pretty normal, a condition for ransomware, and then alert people proactively on that. So rather than waiting days or weeks before you realize ransomware has impacted a machine, you'll know almost immediately, basically when your next backup occurs. And that's something that's pretty important, right? And this goes to the idea of analytics and compliance and backup and continuity really shifting more towards data management in the sense that you're doing things proactively to keep them resilient, and you're not just necessarily, offering recovery and data protection. You're now offering solid business use cases around analytics. And then the last component, understand your support structure. You're not alone, right? Given that you're going to spend a lot of time on a lot of projects, and it's only getting worse, you're getting more projects, more technologies thrown at you. A lot of you are being asked to look at infrastructure as a service, software as a service solutions. Going back and using your DR product or your backup product or your DR service or whatever that might be that you put in place as a strategy, you're probably not using it every day. If you are using it every day and you're spending a lot of time in it every day, then you're probably feeling less productive than you want to be. And that could be an issue. But if you are spending, if you're not spending a ton of time in it every day and something happens, you need to be sure that you understand the support structure around how you get help. All right, and I think understanding vendor dependencies is a big part. We go back to the stack before. It's important to realize that this stack exists. You might have multiple vendors involved in your backup solution just for backing up one workload. Understanding that stack and how they interact together is pretty critical. Now, I have a bias here, and I think fewer is simpler and simpler is better. And that's a recommendation, but that doesn't mean you have to take the recommendation. The main recommendation here is just really important to understand this stack. Who do you call first, and how do you interact with the other dependencies, right? If I have a Windows-based backup software and I'm backing up VMware, how does VMware come into play here? Does my backup software handle all that? Does it report on that? Does it tell me when there's VMware issues? Do I have to call VMware first or second or third? Understanding those types of dependencies are always really important. Is the solution or vendor going to be proactive or reactive? And this is something you don't see a lot of proactive support that's out there, especially as you look at vendors that can encompass this entire stack. It's really darn important that that vendor is pretty darn good. And from a support perspective, reactive is kind of what you typically get, but proactive is where the analytics come in from a support vendor, both for on-premise as well as the cloud, and being able to tell you proactively, hey, you are about to have an issue, that hard drive is going to fail, it's going to impact your backups in about 7 days, why don't we fix it now without fighting the fire? That's an important message you want to look out for. And are they responsive? So it's not just about, there's a lot of ways that people will reach out to vendors through social media, through general support tracks, through communities. Do they have strong communities? Are they responsive? And especially in social media, are they responsive? Looking at Spiceworks, Reddit, and a lot of the places that are out there for folks to interact. You can interact with your vendors out there, and that's, I think, an important one as well, to be able to just make sure that you can get the help you need from the community, but then vendors are out there and responsive and helping as well. So now we get to Unitrends, right? For folks that haven't heard about Unitrends before, how can we help in a lot of this? So we play directly into a lot of this and into a lot of the areas around simplicity, right? We truly want to kill complexity, reduce vendors, reduce vendor finger pointing, reduce the setup and time to value for your solutions, and we handle all-in-one enterprise backup and continuity. You notice on the left in the picture, right? There is a cloud component to that we can offer with our cloud services, but we also offer capabilities that integrate deeply with Amazon Web Services, Azure, and other cloud providers as well. All right, so there's a lot of flexibility here depending on your scenario, and this will handle on-premise as well as secondary site components to continuity, as well as cloud. But we deliver solutions in secure ways. We talked about kind of that new world approach where you have that hardened Linux appliance. That component to things has been hugely helpful for us, especially given the ransomware epidemic that's going on right now. And the support component of it all, really understanding how you're going to get support and unifying support and delivering high customer satisfaction levels and responsiveness all over the world in terms of communities and different locations geographically. That's a big part of what Unitrends offers and is about. So a couple of proof points. You take that stack, we can deliver that basically in an appliance that integrates into the Unitrends cloud or AWS or Azure as well. But if you want one vendor for all of it, you can get that. And this ultimately reduces your need to manage infrastructure, your need to manage security, your need to do a lot of monitoring. All that is basically done in a single all-in-one solution with really cool cloud-based analytics that allow us to proactively support you. The Unitrends cloud is certainly a nice option. It's a gap filler. A lot of folks will drift towards AWS and Azure. We like AWS and Azure. Again, we invest a lot and have a great partnership with Microsoft around the Azure side of things. So phenomenal capabilities and cost structures there. But there are some gaps in terms of continuity. You're not going to necessarily get recovery SLAs. You're going to have some scalability concerns if you're trying to have go beyond a terabyte of data on a single virtual disk of a virtual machine. Those types of gaps do exist, and the Unitrends cloud is kind of here to fulfill those gaps, cover physical and virtual environments, again, give you a single vendor across that entire solution stack, including the cloud, offer really cool things like a 1-hour recovery SLA for your whole environment, and offer cloud services that are specifically targeted at long-term retention and failover. And on the support side of things, company's been around for a long time, very mature, getting close to 20,000 customers with a holistic 98% customer satisfaction rating, and we cover the hardware, the software, the cloud, all that. So when you cover all of that and you're getting a high customer satisfaction rating, that's a tough thing to do, but it actually contributes to the fact that because it is one support call, it truly does eliminate a lot of the complexity around support and the vendor dependencies, and that allows us to provide a better experience. And our cloud-based monitoring and predictive analytics is a big part of that infrastructure that will help us proactively support you before you're even aware of issues. And just wrapping up here, so today, just 2 hours ago, we actually announced version 10. This will help in a big, big way align IT with the business, especially when you think of recovery SLAs. You can now define as well as analyze and report that entire workflow of the business SLA right from our user interface in a very simplistic way. And just to visualize it, because this is not a V10 webinar, I'm going to move quickly, but just visualizing it, you can see you can define the SLAs around RPOs. So we talked before about having individual backup jobs and it being up to you to schedule those jobs, pick the right times, pick the right frequencies, make sure that there's other jobs running replication and other jobs running archiving and other places to handle retention. That's all done in one spot in version 10. And notice thinking of RPOs as a business metric rather than saying, okay, well, I'm going to schedule it to run Monday through Wednesday at these times and these days and all that kind of stuff. This just simplifies everything around scheduling to meet your business needs and define that policy. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen in the way you want, right? We'll automate everything under the hood to try to meet these policies. But if you try to run, a 5-minute RPO against a 10-terabyte virtual machine that has problems taking VMware snapshots frequently without impacting the production database, you're not going to meet that RPO very well, right? So having visibility and analytics against your actual RPOs versus the objective itself, as well as your RTOs versus the objective itself, this is critical, right? And this goes into the analytics and reporting we talked about before that can say I can recover, I'm meeting those objectives and SLAs I've set, and I'm doing well at this point. So this is a business level report, compliance around your SLAs, full visibility from the definition all the way through the understanding of it all. So wrapping up, don't forget to align recovery with the business. Just saw some cool things that will help you do that with our solution. But in the end, whether it's Unitrends or somebody else, it's just really important, obviously, to kind of make that shift from saying, is something backed up, and is it being replicated, to how long am I going to be down? How much data can I lose? Thinking along those terms, I think, will definitely help align what you're doing with the business. Focusing your strategy, because you're always going to have finite resources and budgets and lots of different things you want to protect. You got to prioritize. Removing complexity is a big way to help you do more, especially with less budget and less time and less people. Getting complexity out of the picture helps a lot. And being more proactive and resilient by leveraging, more advanced analytics and automation that's available today. I think that's important to look out for. And support is just one of those things you just kind of have to be able to trust and have confidence in. And there are obviously ways to get that really well, but just really understanding the structure that you need in general, no matter who the vendor is, I think goes a long way to helping you achieve your goals. So that'll wrap up. Obviously, our stuff is available for you to try. We do have a limited T-shirt availability. I know people like swag. This one was from the graphical artist from Grand Theft Auto. Did one of these T-shirts, so that's pretty cool. And you can even request a demo and get more information around V10, which again just announced today. We have a good landing page for that, and we're always here to talk if you have questions. Kevin?
Thanks, Joe. We've still got some time here. If you want to ask a question, you can do so by typing your question into the bottom right hand of the player, and we'll get to your question shortly. But right now, we'll just jump right in. The first question is, how do you actually detect ransomware, and how easy is it to roll back to the last backup before the infection?
Great question. So in terms of the how we detect, there's a couple of ways. The main one that's going to be available to everybody, and it's pretty darn simple because it just happens, is we have predictive analytics happening under the hood when we ingest data as a part of backup. And we understand the systems and the patterns of that data that allow us to detect certain ransomware conditions, and we can alert you right away. It's patent pending at the moment. I've had a lot of people ask, what metrics do you use? What's behind the analytics? All that kind of stuff. I purposely don't go into the details. It is a security-related thing in general, but it's also a patent pending thing for Unitrends. So just mind you that the details are obviously in the data, and we're analyzing that data regularly to understand if, you could see lots of change rates related to encryption or other types of issues in the environment. And again, you'll learn that right away as a part of the backup process when we see those conditions being met. And then how do you recover? So whether it's a physical machine or a virtual machine, Unitrends is able to do what we call instant recovery. And really what that is from our global deduplicated backups, we can expose that data out as a full machine to be able to run in a virtual environment very quickly. And again, even if it's a physical backup, we can spin it up very quickly inside of a virtual environment as well. But if you don't have a virtual environment or you need to restore it directly back to the physical server, of course, bare metal recoveries are available as well. All those reduce downtime very quickly for full machines. And that's typically how a lot of people are getting around ransomware, is they just go back to an earlier point in time of the machine. And knowing when your last good backup was through the testing and automation we showed is kind of the second level, especially if it's one of those really nasty ransomware scenarios that kind of lays dormant and then activates later. Doing the automated testing that we shown there with what we call recovery assurance, that's a big piece that helps even in the ransomware story as well.
Thanks, Joe. Here's a question that's kind of an add-on probably for the recovery assurance is, how does Unitrends verify that my backups are working so that I can recover when I need to?
Great. So I went through that and even showed some screenshots, so I'll just summarize pretty quickly. What we're going to do is basically spin up full business services in your environment. Now, you can choose to do it one VM at a time. That's up to you. But typically, your business isn't up and running until, all the dependent machines that deliver a service are available. So we do recommend and provide the ability for you to spin those up in an isolated lab and have automated testing run against those, and then they're spun down. They don't use any extra storage. They do need infrastructure just for the compute on the side to be able to spin them up in a virtual environment, isolate them off. But that can be done at a DR site. It can be done in the Unitrends cloud, as well as a part of our services. So there's lots of ways to make sure it's not impacting your production. And that testing is what we can really automate and then report against your RPOs, your RTOs from the analytics of those tests.
Okay, next question is, we have data compliance requirements. Where are your data centers located, and can we choose where our data sits?
So you can, especially if you have specifics around data not leaving a particular country. We have 6 data centers globally at this point, a couple in the United States, 1 in Canada, Germany, the UK, and Australia.
Okay. Next question is, how does Unitrends license their software and appliances?
So appliances are basically a box, right? You get the whole box, you pay for the box and everything in it. There are two options. You have an Enterprise Edition and an Enterprise Plus Edition, and there are obviously prices associated with those, but you're just paying one price for the box for the most part. Not for the most part, that's actually vague. You're paying one price for the box. With our software, there are 4 editions, and we even have a free version, and that lets you scale, and the software is priced by socket for hypervisor protection, as well as by server for any physical server protection. All the pricing and the packages are on the website. So definitely recommend, if you're interested in understanding how we're priced and how we're packaged, go look at those on the website. I think you'll see a great opportunity for TCO savings, depending on whatever else you might be looking for out there.
Okay. Next question is, you talked a little bit about Office 365 protection. Is that included in the product, or is that an add-on?
Good question. So Office 365 being a SaaS-based solution, and we talk about all-in-one, but something that's pretty important to remember is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and that's not what that means in all-in-one. All-in-one really has a lot to do with the vertical stack and being able to deliver a simple solution. So with Office 365, it's a SaaS-based application that lives in the cloud. The approach we take there is to give you less management. There is zero setup around Office 365 because it is a SaaS-based service itself. You get a simple user interface that you can do any kind of granular recovery that you want. It goes directly back into the production Office 365 environment. It is fully secure so that IT administrators can't look at the data within the emails or the SharePoint or OneDrive objects. And the fact that there's no time to set it up, you don't even have to manage backups, you just perform granular recovery out of it. You don't have to manage storage, you don't have to pay for storage, you don't have to manage copies of the storage or the resilience around it because it's all handled within the cloud. So it's all cloud to cloud.
Okay. Let's see. I think this is the last question. When will version 10 be available, and will I be able to demo the new functionality in that version?
So 10 is going to be available in June, and we have the ability to do demonstrations today. So if you go to the URL that's here today around version 10, that'll get a quick request into Unitrends to give you a call, and we'll show it to you. More content and on-demand demos will be available over the next couple of weeks.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe. We're just about out of time. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and you'll receive an email with the link to the on-demand version after the webinar. We'll also highlight the winner of the Amazon gift card in that email as well, and we'll contact the winner via email after the webinar. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Take care, everybody.